Hello, my name is Garvin and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today we continue our look at Lemuria in popular culture. In this case, we're looking at Lemuria in Marvel Comics. And we're going to be mainly discussing the crossover event of 1989, Atlantis Attacks. But before I get too deep into that, let's talk a little backstory. So last week, I started by talking about the first run of Jack Kirby's Eternals comic series in the 1970s. And as far as I could tell, that comic book series took place mostly outside of the main Marvel continuity. Because otherwise, I have some really awkward questions, like, we had an army of deviants posing as outer space demons attacking New York City, and not even Daredevil showed up to fight them? 80% of Marvel superheroes, especially at this time, live in New York City. If you're in the mainline continuity and you have a massive assault on New York City, you're just going to have superheroes there. This also is kind of a note that maybe you shouldn't station the vast majority of your characters in a single city. I mean, DC spreads their characters out and it works for them. Just a note there, Marvel. Well, in the 1980s, specifically 1985 and 1986, there was a second volume, and the storyline was brought into the mainline Marvel continuity, which led to things like Cersei joining the Avengers and other interactions. It also meant that there had to be some explanations about the Deviants and Eternals' history and how that meshed with the main Marvel universe. This is because of two things. First, Marvel Comics owned the rights to Conan the Barbarian at the time. And instead of splitting Conan off on his own, they decided to set Conan's stories in the dim prehistory of Marvel Earth, adopting the history that Robert Howard, the creator of Conan, had written. This was easy enough because Howard already said that Lemuria was ruled by an inhuman race that enslaved humanity, and you could call the Deviants an inhuman race that enslaved humanity without stretching the truth almost at all, so it meshed together pretty nicely there. Additionally, the story of Thongar and the Wizards of Lemuria was also adapted into comic book form by Marvel Comics. So they had to work these three different things into a single timeline, and they actually did a pretty good job of it. Thongar, and I'm going to talk more about that when we talk about the novel, which will be happening later, was set about 500,000 years ago, more or less, in the Marvel timeline. Then I believe King Kull, the predecessor of Conan, is set somewhere around 100,000 years ago. The Deviants is like 20 to 18,000. These dates are a little loose, just to be clear. And Conan's era is 14 to 10,000 years ago. Keep in mind, when we talk about recorded history, it's not much more than 6,000 years at best. So, plenty of space to work with there. Now, the second thing is Namor, the Avenging Son. And at this point, Marvel Comics had decided to link Namor and his mother's people to Atlantis and declare them the descendants of Atlantis, which was not something that was intended by his creator. And I'm going to tell you to look at my Namor video for more information on that. Now, Namor and his people were often opposed by a related group of undersea dwelling people who called themselves Lemurians. And to work this group in, it was decided that Lemurians were descended from other Atlanteans who split off from the main group, settled near to the old Deviant city. They were unaware the Deviants were still alive, and the Deviants didn't want to interact with them, so they, kind of ignored each other. And Cook on the name Lemurians has a opposing identity to Atlantean, and they were mostly an antagonistic force at this point in Marvel Comics. Now, I hope I haven't made this too complicated. The big thing to remember for this comic book storyline is there are two groups of people who consider themselves Lemurians. The first ones are the Deviants, and the second one are a group of undersea merfolk, basically, who adopted the name because they settled next to the ruins. So, let's move forward, shall we? So, getting to the plot of Atlantis Attacks itself, the focus of the story is on a deviant priest of the elder god Set named Gwar, who returns from being exiled in space and seeks to bring about the return of his divine patron Set to Earth. This version of Set is lifted pretty much wholesale from Robert Howard's mythology and has nothing to do with the Egyptian god. In fact, if you read this story, you will do yourself a favor if you just forget about the ancient Egyptian religion completely and just think of Set as some sort of weird murderous snake god, because that's what he is in this story. If you want more information on that, I did do a companion video for patrons only, and you'll be able to access that for $1 a month. So feel free to click on the link below and sign up. So, Gwar, in order to bring about the return of his murderous elder snake god, allies himself with a Lemurian who is a self-declared empress named Lara. I apologize if I'm mangling the pronunciations. I should have the names up on the screen so you can look them up yourself. Together, they con the current ruler of Atlantis, named Atuma, into attacking the surface world to give them cover to gather the magic artifacts and blood sacrifices to recreate the Serpent Crown, which I'm not going to get too into that either. It's a magic MacGuffin that lets the evil snake god of murder return to the world and take complete domination over it. So, recreating the Serpent Crown is bad, and that's all we really need to know for this story. Since we're going over villains here, let me talk about Atuma. He's a Namor villain, and he's a member of a tribe of nomadic Atlanteans who were banished from Atlantis generations ago. There's a lot of splinter groups from Atlantis in this story. Sorry about that. And he decided that he's angry about his ancestors being exiled, and he wants to conquer Atlantis and usurp Namor. And at the time of this story, he had achieved that goal, exiled Namor, who was working to come back from exile and overthrow Atuma, because Atuma is basically an underwater Attila the Hun. I mean the pop culture Attila, not the real one. Another way I could explain this is take Conan, remove all the cool stuff and any morality Conan has, and then stick him underwater and turn him into a villain. And Conan does have morals. I'll admit they're very rough and ready morals, to put it mildly, but he does have something of a moral code. Atuma basically believes he has the right to take anything he wants and no one should stop him. I really enjoy hating this guy. He is the guy I decided I like hating the most. And he deserves it. He treats his own kid, the Atlantean hero Andromeda, like trash because she's a girl. Even though she is one of the best military commanders in the Atlantean military, something you think a barbarian like him would prize, he's just like, ew, girl cuties, no. And he even kidnapped Jean Grey, thinking he could get her to, bear his children, which he gets nowhere because it's Jean Grey. She basically rolls him up like a basketball and just says, yeah, get away from me, you're gross. He never lays a hand on her, but there's nothing but bad here. And I'm always so happy watching this guy get his face kicked in because he always deserves it. And listen, there is a good amount of ground for gray villains and nuance and everything, but there is something very elementally satisfying about seeing someone who is just thoroughly bad and stupid and watching him get the crap kicked out of him. I'm not apologizing for that, and if you enjoy that too, don't you dare apologize either. The crossover takes place in a series of annual issues for a variety of different comics like Iron Man, Avengers, X-Men. Just in case anybody didn't know, an annual issue is an extra issue in addition to the standard 12 issues released in a comic's yearly run. It's often larger than the standard issues and may have secondary stories in there, usually meant to plug up plot holes from various story arcs in the year. So unlike more modern examples of big crossover events like Civil War or Civil War II, there isn't a main book with a main plot line to follow. You just have to grab all the different issues that the crossover took place in, even if you didn't normally read those comics, assuming you were interested in doing so. I'm not going to dive too deep into the different parts of the story because I have to explain all the differences between the 1980s Marvel comics and today's Marvel comics, and that's a video series. Not a video, a series in of itself. Just to give you some examples, I would have to explain who are the New Mutants? Why is X-Factor made up of the original X-Men? And why do they live on a giant spaceship that's floating out over the ocean? And you would have to sit through at least 5 minutes of me raging over Peter Parker's marriage. Because in the 80s, he's a happily married man, and now, thanks to editors who just hate the fact that my boy Pete had something that made him happy, he's not. And it's because of a certain hack that I haven't read I'm sorry. That's not part of... Let me get back on topic, guys. I am really sorry about that. You did not need to hear me go off on that. Suffice to say, there's a lot of changes from the 1980s to the 2020s, which isn't surprising, but it's not something I want to spend too much time talking about. Okay, getting back to our topic. So, during this story, the Atlantean military attacks the United States with a combination of sorcery, swords, and high technology. Meanwhile, while the US Army and a lot of heroes are fighting to defend the United States against undersea marauders, our main villains are working in the background using various snake cults and other pawns to gather artifacts and mark various superheroines for sacrifice. And honestly, this just seems really dumb to me because, just for example, they mark Sue Richards of the Fantastic Four. And as much as I enjoy making fun of Reed Richards, and I do, he is still an incredibly intelligent and, let's be honest, powerful man, not because of his superpowers, but because he has loads of connections throughout the political and superhero world. The very people whose notice you're trying to escape and distract with giant armies are the people you're gonna get paying attention to you if you kidnap someone like Sue Richards. This is like thinking you can kidnap Taylor Swift while she's on a concert tour and keep it out of the news. That's how bananas this is. If they had grabbed 7 regular random women from across the world, it's unlikely anyone important would have noticed until it was too late. But instead, they grab Sue Richards, they grab Jean Grey, they grab Dagger from Cloak and Dagger, just a bunch of superheroes that other superheroes know, and will go, hey, wait a minute, where is she? She did not come home last night. Someone should check in on that. Oh look, I'm a superhero. I will check in on this. If you're trying to avoid the attention of superheroes, don't kidnap other superheroes. These are not smart villains, guys. What can I say? Atlantis' military, as you can guess, suffers heavy casualties, and this is one of the reasons I like seeing Atuma kicked in the face, because he's just so dumb. The other villains are using him as a combination of distraction and has an additional layer of blood sacrifice. They're even planning to destroy Atlantis and wipe out its people as a massive blood sacrifice to Set, which, to be fair, that is some straight, proper villainy. There is no moral greatness here, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm okay with that. But I hope now you can see why I said last week the title was somewhat deceptive, because Atlantis is just a pawn in this story, a big distraction. It's the forces of the Deviants and the merfolk Lemurians who are the real bad guys here. And, by the way, if you don't know the history of the Serpent Crown, I know I said I wasn't going to go into it, but I am just going to mention that the collected volume Atlantis Attacks, which I will link to below, has the entire history of the Serpent Crown and the Marvel history of the Elder God Set, as narrated by the Watcher at the back of the book. That said, there are some characters here that really aren't around in the modern day, so you might need to wiki a couple of them, and there are some characters that are completely unrecognizable if you have no experience with 1980s comics. In fact, I do want to mention one of them because I had completely forgotten about her, and I really enjoyed her appearance in the story, so I hope you indulge me here. So, the young lady who went by the superhero name of Firebird was actually the first Latina superhero in Marvel Comics, and she had a very interesting array of powers focused on heat control and generation, which let her make and control fire, and she could also control air and fly to a limited degree, which is a pretty nice package. She shows up in this story confronting a lost patrol of Atlanteans who have come way too inland and hit the desert, and what really caught my eye is she is capable of just wiping them out with a wave of her hand. And she doesn't. Instead, she shows up and tries to talk to them. And when they won't talk, she just gives them a little demonstration of how powerful they are and goes, "Wouldn't you prefer to talk about this?" And then she points out in the story the big problem with the Atlanteans' plan of conquering the world. The Atlanteans used to be human, but they have changed to the point that they cannot survive outside of the water. Namor can because his father was human, so he's a hybrid with abilities from both sides of his heritage. And her question is, let's say you do win and you conquer the world. What are you going to do with all this dry land you can't do anything with? What is the point now? And when they all look at each other and go, well, that's a good question, she suggests maybe they just go off in their boat, find somewhere nice and wet and relaxing, and just sit out the war. And they agree, and she sends them off after making sure they can't hurt anyone. This was a very humane and non-violent conflict resolution, and it was very well done, pointing out, among other things in the story, just how dumb Atuma was being. I'll admit that added to my enjoyment. And I kind of regret she's not in more material, because this little story with her made me very interested in her character. Just as a side note, I know a lot of people want to see more diversity in comics, and I'm just going to say for anyone listening, I think bringing back a character like Firebird is a good way to do that, because you have a Latina superhero, someone who is just in a short appearance manages to be very interesting and has interesting and different powers from others. Why not give that a try, right? Let's get back to the story, though. Minor spoiler warning here. The villains are thwarted because a bunch of superheroes get together to find their kidnapped friends and family members and basically storm the underwater citadel. And they managed to prevent Seth from coming back and, enslaving us under his scaly coils. Yay. But what I found interesting in Marvel's representation is how Lemuria is set up directly to be Atlantis' opposite at all times. Atlantis is a human kingdom. Lemuria is outright ruled or heavily influenced by inhuman forces that seek to enslave or destroy humans. Atlantis gives humanity heroes, like Namor. Lemuria produces villains, like the two we saw here. In the adjustment to Kirby's history, as I mentioned, Atlantis has been at war with the Deviants and the underwater Lemurians for longer than our written history has existed. This won't be the last time we see Lemuria set up as an opposite to Atlantis, either as a contemporary or even predating Atlantis. And we did see that in past videos as well. The various mystic groups that wrote about Lemuria often attached it to Atlantis for various reasons. But here, Atlantis is made into a heroic force and Lemuria into a villainous force. And we're going to probably see a little bit more of that as we continue. I just thought this was an interesting theme for Lemuria in Marvel Universe, and I wanted to speak to it directly. Well, with that note, I think this is a good place to stop for the week. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on the subjects of future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. You also get access to bonus content like companion videos and other things. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, who remains my biggest supporter. As always, man, thank you. Next week, we're going to go to the movies. We're going to watch The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. I hope you join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.